afternoon and welcome to the third year of Alconversation. A big welcome to everyone here who's at the Alcon Academy in Watchmore Park, and a big welcome to all of those individuals who are joining us online as well. So this is the second year that we've broadcast Alconversation with the purpose of reaching an even larger audience than we have before. So a big extended welcome to all those new joiners to Alconversation this year. So we will be joined and are joined by a number of experts from across the UK and Ireland. Before I introduce our panel and our chair, I'd just like to share what we're here for today. So the Alconversation gives us a really fantastic opportunity to talk about optometry in 2019 and beyond, to debate with passion and energy and positivity some of the issues, some of the challenges and some of the opportunities faced within optometry. So let me introduce you, our panel. We have Professor Ed Mallon, who is here the President of College of Optometrists. We have Roshni Kanabar, who is from the Association of Optometrists. And we have Max Halford from the Association of British Dispensing Opticians. I'd like to hand over to Mr. Richard Edwards, who is the Clinical Advisor to the Optical Consumer Complaints Service, who's going to chair today. Over to you, Richard. Thank you.
Well, folks, it feels like that time of year again. The old Chinese saying about "may you live in interesting times" has probably never felt true. I suspect that we're going to have quite an interesting 90 minutes of debate. So I'd like to extend the welcome not only to the live studio audience. I always feel a live studio audience is better than a dead one, and but also this year in particular to those people who are joining us online. In terms of panel, just before we kind of get into the discussion and debate, just to bring people up to date, we were expecting to be joined today by Alistair Bridge, the Director of Policy and Strategy from the GOC. Unfortunately, Alistair sends his apologies as he can't make it. So Alistair won't be with us today, but what he has done is he has provided an updated statement on some of the issues that are going to be discussed. So at appropriate times, I will just kind of feed those into the debate as an appropriate point, just so that we do have that view in the room, as it were. And really what I'd like to do is perhaps ask the members of the panel just say a little bit more about themselves before we get into the debate, just so that the audience have an understanding of the background and therefore the likely items of interest for the three panel members that have kindly agreed to join us this afternoon. So I'll start with Roshni, I think.
Hi everyone, my name's Roshni. I'm Clinical and Regulatory Advisor for the AOP. I also work at City University. I supervise third years there, and I work at an independent practice in St Albans. So I work 5.5 days a week.
Hi everyone, my name is Max. I'm a contact lens optician by profession, but I'm actually the clinical lead of the Association of British Dispensing Opticians as well. My background, I'm chair of an LOC. I'm very much involved with LOCs and LOCs with a particular focus on extended services.
Hi everyone, I'm Ed Mallon. I'm head of optometry at University of Bradford. Trained as an optometrist at Aston though, hooray! Aston. The other job is the great privilege of being president of our college, the College of Optometrists. My background's interesting though, because I used to be in this environment, but there. I was a technical person. I was a lighting designer and lighting engineer before leaving the theatre to become an optician. So that's my claim to fame, I guess, running away from the entertainment business.
Running from entertainment to optometry. Go figure. Okay, so I think we'll start the first question. I think, Jonathan, you're going to pose the first question on behalf of our viewers online.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Richard. So from our online audience who have been submitting questions on the run-in to this event, and we've looked at those and sort of, simulated the theme, and this is the number one theme that came through. So their question: we have all been made aware recently of the recent Trailblazer Group activities around optometric apprenticeships, and this has seen a galvanising of the eye care community around a position of concern regarding what this means for the profession in terms of standards of patient care that will then follow. Perhaps even a two-tier standard of qualification or competency. The question to the panel is, in light of this, what is your position on the optometry apprenticeship proposal? Will it improve the quality of care or simply dumb it down?
Okay, so while the panel have a ponder and a think, I'll just read the statement that Alistair's very kindly sent me. So Alistair's comment on behalf of the GOC is, obviously the GOC understand that there's widespread concern about the development of optometry apprenticeship standard. And we'd like to explain our role and how this relates to that of the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education and the Trailblazer Group involved in developing the proposed standard. The GOC is responsible for protecting the public by setting the standards for all optometry programmes in the UK and for approving and quality assuring these programmes. The role of the Institute of Apprenticeships and Technical Education in assessing the proposed optometry apprenticeship standard does not supersede this role. The Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education has made clear that it would not approve the proposed optometry apprenticeship standard without receiving assurance that it is consistent with our requirements. The proposed standard is currently subject to consultation, and we have not yet been asked to decide whether it would be consistent with our requirements. Any programme of education and training designed to meet the optometry apprenticeship standard would require our approval in the usual way for students undertaking the programme to be able to join our register and practice as an optometrist. Through our involvement with the Trailblazer Group, involved in developing this standard, we've ensured that the group is aware that the standard must be consistent with our requirements and that any programme of education and training designed to meet the standard would then require our approval. We hope that clarifies our role and provides assurance that any new programmes designed to meet the proposed optometry apprenticeship standard will be subject to the same scrutiny as any other new route to registration. So that's the GOC view as of today, hot off the press. Let's get into the views of our panel. So I'm going to start with ladies first. So Roshni, what are your thoughts on this very topical subject?
So at the AOP, so we represent approximately 80% of our 15,000 optometrists that we've got, and the majority of our members have actually opposed the apprenticeship, and we agree with them for three main reasons. The first reason is the risk to patient safety. So a mainly workplace-based route to qualification, we are concerned that it would not equip students with the fundamental clinical knowledge required and the level of supervision that is required, especially in a practice that has a strong retail focus. And we're also concerned that there's no way to ensure appropriate standards of training if students are spending 80% of their time in a mixed clinical and retail setting. The second reason is the risk of professional credibility and the risk to professional credibility and public confidence. So this could damage the credibility of the optometric profession, especially at a time where practices have a vital and growing role, and often taking on extended roles such as MECs, pre and post cataracts, stable glaucoma monitoring. And we feel at the AOP that the risks really outweigh the benefits to this proposal, and we understand that that in some parts of the country it is hard to find optometrists, and we do support the aim of allowing students from disadvantaged backgrounds into the profession. However, we do feel that there are other ways to go about this, such as bursaries, scholarships, sponsorships. A lot of our members based on a wide variety of first-hand experience in practicing optometry, there's a high level of academic training, and we feel that it's best that this fundamental foundation of knowledge is provided through a university setting where the education is sort of standardised. It would be very hard for the GOC to monitor the level of training that is provided to students when they're working in so many different practices, and a lot of their knowledge would be based on the knowledge of their supervisors, and how can that be sort of monitored? So it's quite reassuring to hear the statement from the GOC's view on this, and that's quite reassuring. Most of the current routes to registration involve a 3-year optometry degree followed by minimum 1-year pre-registration, and the Trailblazer Group is proposing that a degree apprenticeship student would be complete. An optometry student would be complete for registration in 4 years, which is the same amount of time I spent at university full-time doing a 3-year degree and a 1-year pre-reg. So we're not really quite sure how that would be feasible. So that's our sort of main concerns and the 3 main reasons why we're opposing apprenticeship.
Thank you. Max?
It's really interesting to hear those comments. I can't remember any time, I've been in optics for 20 plus years, and I can never remember education being something that you talked about and it was so emotive, and I think actually probably that's a very good thing. because it's actually focused everyone's mind on it and the way forward. But I mean, it's certainly not from Abdo's position in any way to dictate or to suggest a way that optometrists should be trained in, or what is the best way forward with this. I think the concerns would be around, you know, the quality of the education and patient safety at the end of the day. You know, at the moment it is a way that is led, and it is an established degree process, and you know, our main concerns going forward would be, you know, although we don't want to make a comment on the apprenticeship process, is the fact that if the outcomes should remain, patient safety is the number one, and a great standard of education throughout for the optometrist.
Ed.
Yeah, well, we have at the moment in this country an optometric profession that I think is the envy of many parts of the world. So that's the first thing to say, and we don't really want to do anything, and we must not allow anything that would reduce that standard, would reduce that level of patient care. There's been a huge amount of debate and interest around the apprenticeship, and it's been fabulous to see that. But in educational circles, that amount of debate has been going on since 2016. We've been living that for a number of years, and it's related to the GOC's Education Strategic Review, where there are some fairly big pieces of furniture that might move around as a result of that, which has been giving us, as academics and educators, an equal level of uncertainty around what the future might hold, and the same would apply to the qualification bodies as well. That said, clearly I think it's been very eloquently said by my colleagues here that we don't want anything that would introduce a two-tier system. We have a standard of qualification of an optometrist, which is what I went through, and my colleagues here went through, that we have to maintain. It's key that we do that, and the college is an observer at the Trailblazer Group, as is my home institution, University of Bradford. I send someone to that, and 4 or 5 other universities do the same. And the reason why we are there is we want to be in the room while those discussions are taking place, so that we can comment on what we think might be feasible or possible in an employment training setting. Some things may be possible, some things probably won't be possible. I've been involved in educating optometrists for 20 years. I know how hard it is. I know how long it takes to train someone in early years slit lamp and retinoscopy and all the other things, patient communications. It's tough to do. So certainly when there are discussions around apprenticeships going on, I think the educators and the professional body need to be there really as a check and balance to ensure that we're in the room and we can input to that process. We will absolutely, as a college, and we will as an institution, in terms of my institution, strongly oppose anything that puts at risk our great training process for optometrists in the UK. Anything that puts patient safety at risk, and anything that goes towards a reduction of standards or a bleeding away of the basic scientific and professional understanding and training that optometrists go through in order to join the register. That will not be allowed to happen.
So that's interesting. So if I come back to Roshni, that I guess, how do you feel when you hear that 5 of the universities are actually at the table? Because it's news to me. So that, does that go anywhere to assuaging the concerns, do you think? Or
I mean, it's a really difficult one. I mean, I've been thinking about this quite a lot recently, and I'm just concerned that how it would work, really. I think that I understand that the reason for suggesting an apprenticeship, and we do obviously understand the reason, but I think that there are definitely other ways. And I think that, for example, when I work at City University, I supervise third year students, and I have 2 of them at the same time, and I sit in the room in the middle of both of them, and these are third years. They have 2 years of optometry training, they have the fundamental knowledge, they have training in anatomy, visual optics, and a lot of them already have like a job in practice where they're communicating with patients, and for me, I just don't understand how it would work with, these are optometry students that don't have any of this knowledge at this stage. So in terms of supervision in practice, how would a supervisor, when they have their own sort of pressures of seeing patients, and would they be able to sit there throughout the whole test and watch what they're doing? And also these students don't have that knowledge at this stage. So I think that for 80% work-based sort of placement, I think it will be quite difficult to do that.
I guess, Max, from your experience, any insights or learnings from the way Abdo trains people? Because I guess there's different modalities, different mechanisms that your professional body have been exploring for some time. Any insights that you can share with us about, from your personal view, about what you see working? And
I mean, I trained on a 3-year distance learning course. I mean, which involved two block releases of 2 days a week. I went away for 4 days a week up to City to do my DO course, and then went on to do a contact lens qualification thereafter. I mean, in actual fact, at the time, I was a mature student with a young family. So from the point of view of being able to earn and do that training, you know, the modality of that absolutely was fantastic. And I got the support of great supervision in practice and a very well-established network and a very well-established framework that worked there. And it certainly suited me, and it was the only way I could have got into the profession at the time by actually doing that. However, you know, that was quite a few years ago, and things have absolutely changed. And I do wonder a little bit, with the level of clinical input and the complexity of the professional role now, particularly for optometrists, you know, I'm not qualified to comment on it, but I do wonder if there's elements of it which perhaps would not fit into a similar type of model. I do think, however, that the fact that all 5 institutes are at the table talking about it is a good thing. You know, because you need to be at the table, you need to put your input, you need to kind of give your reflections on things and being there. So it's much more important to be round that table than staying away on point of principle.
Yeah, good. And I guess, Ed, from your perspective, given your background at Bradford, I suppose, are there any other degree qualifications that are being kind of repackaged or disaggregated into apprenticeship modality?
I think there are links, certainly with certain bits of engineering at Bradford,
right, okay.
and my alma mater at Aston. I mean, they've got various engineering apprenticeships. Very different setting, though, isn't it? It's a very different type of thing. And it just to come back on the point about the, you know, how it might be done. The devil clearly is in the detail. And, you know, I understand the huge costs involved in training. We have almost medical school level student staff ratios. The requirements for supervision are huge, and optometry programs are very expensive to run. And getting that level of supervision in a very sort of disparate practice-based environment, I think personally is quite a difficult thing to do. So the actual detail around that would be absolutely crucial if it was going to be a success, which is why certainly we want to be around the table while the discussions are being had, we being Bradford and indeed the college similar.
Nick.
Okay, so Nick Rumley, I'm going to make a couple of comments here because I've been involved for 12, 14 years with the Manchester Registerable Degree Programme, which completely bypasses the college system, although at registration they're enabled to join the college as members. And in the first years of that programme, we actually got our students in their 6-month starting placement when they were actually part-way through 3rd year, okay? So not at the end of year 3. They had done an accelerated program in their first term of 3rd year, then they joined us. They did 6 months with us, they did 6 months in hospital, and then they went back and did 6 months and submitted a master's dissertation, and they registered, and they are a fantastic bunch of optometrists. So there is the possibility of the right checks and balances, and in fact, that type of program, particularly with the hospital involvement, would enable those people to roll on into the level that I think we all ought to be talking about, which is the next level of higher qualification up and advancing into therapeutics. Second point would be, I've been involved with at least 3 DOs who've come through the Abdo College. They've been fantastically well trained. They've been supported through the 3 years they've done within our practice. And I would say 1 or 2 of the best optometrists I've ever met started as DOs. Actually, they maybe even started in technical jobs in the workshop. They've gone through the dispensing course. We absolutely do need a better and more accessible career ladder for just those situations that Max has said. And I think that part of it could be built in, but by headlining everything around what might be a degree apprenticeship is looking at it through the wrong end of the telescope.
Anything else from the floor? Any other views or thoughts?
Richard, can I just come back on something Nick's just said there? I've, over the years, been involved in practice with many pre-reg optometrists, and the one difference that I've noticed between someone who's going to struggle with their career and someone who is going to fly is their communication skills. And I think the thing is, and I'll pick up on Nick's point, the guys who've come through, and it's very kind of Nick to say that, the guys who've come through the DO course first, I wonder if one of the advantages they've got is the fact that they're that little bit older, and also that they've had an awful lot of time in those 3 years of doing the DO course spent communicating with patients. So I think that sometimes gives them the edge. You have that just confidence with patients that just takes a little bit of time to develop.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and I suppose the other thing that's going into my mind on the back of Nick's comments is, I guess the opportunity for us to all think differently about the modality and how people get to the end point. And I suppose the thing we haven't talked about yet is, what's the role of technology as a catalyst to change? Because I suppose, that may produce very different mechanisms by which we all learn in the future. And again, I would perhaps look to the panel to give a view on, how's technology likely to influence and change the way we do things in the future.
Hugely different, I think. And we've had many technological changes in recent years, haven't we? And it's how we educate people to understand the technology. I think it would be a bad thing to have an optometrist as someone who just looks at a set of numbers and says, oh yes, good or bad. I think there needs to be fundamental underpinnings behind the technology, understand how it works, because the technology doesn't work for every patient. We've had fields for a long time, automatic fields machines, they don't work for every patient. Sometimes we have to resort to other techniques. So the optometrist needs to be able to think on their feet and understand all of the basics so that they can apply those technologies rather than a technician type approach. I think that would be a bad move, and that would be taking away the autonomy of our profession.
A point I'd like to make, and thanks Nick, I was a dispensing optician before becoming an optometrist. And actually part of the reason I did IP is because of Nick. A question I have is the apprenticeship. I would like to see the apprenticeship being aimed at optometrists who are qualified, who want to become locums.
Tell me more.
Well, if you've worked in a particular branch or a particular company,
right,
your experience has only been with that one company, and you then are going to go out to the open field, work in other companies, independent practice, where the equipment differs, the range of equipment is more advanced possibly than you've been used to, and you turn up in the practice and you don't know how to switch anything on.
Okay.
So, I get a lot of locums who come into my practice who haven't used OCT before, haven't used an Optos, can't use a topographer, can't fit contact lenses to a level that I would want them to in my practice, and therefore they're not taken on. So it may be an apprenticeship for people that are thinking of becoming locums would be more appropriate.
Roshni, any thoughts?
That's interesting. I mean, I haven't thought of that before. That is very interesting because I can sort of relate. I used to work for Boots and then I became a locum. And it is hard when you turn up to a practice and you don't know how to use the equipment, but it's difficult because all practices have different equipment. So I don't know how that would work in terms of would they sort of get experience using different equipment, or I'm not quite sure, but I can completely relate to what you're saying about in terms of locum optometrists. And from the locum's point of view, it is difficult if you don't know how to use the equipment and for example, don't know how to interpret OCT. As an optometrist myself, I would say that I'm fairly proactive. So if I knew that I was working in a practice that did have that, I would go and look up how to make sure I feel comfortable interpreting OCT, for example, so that I'm not caught out when I'm working in that store. But yeah, it would be interesting to hear more about that.
I think it probably raises another dimension to this, which is probably not even people who necessarily just want to practice as a locum. I think it just raises another component for the Trailblazer group to think about, which is how do you build in that diversity of experience? Because I mean, Nick mentioned there, in the M-Optom program, there's a period in practice, a period at hospital that gives it that breadth. And there is a risk, I guess, from an apprenticeship perspective, it could become quite narrow. So I guess that the challenge would then be, how do you create that breadth of experience so that when people do enter the register, they've got a slightly broader perspective on how things can happen. So it's a point I certainly hadn't thought of as well. Chris, and then we'll go to Jonathan.
Yeah, it's really picking up on something that Roshni said. I mean, I don't think I'm misspeaking that we all know why the apprenticeship has been proposed is because large employers can't get optometrists in the places they want at the price that they want. While optometrists can all sign a nice petition, and it might get kicked out if the AOP and the college get scared enough. It might get booted down the road. It doesn't actually get us away from the problem that the major employers in the country don't have the workforce that they want in the places that they want. So you mentioned, Roshni, some alternatives to solving this problem. So what are some of those? And how do you actually solve that original problem of having the right workforce in the places that the employers want it?
From workforce in this profession, do we? Okay, well, before we go to Jonathan, on that fundamental question about workforce, go Max first, view on that?
Well, it's been, I've worked in the Southwest for the whole of my life, and the Southwest is absolutely notorious for recruitment problems for optometrists. I mean, they just, although it's probably one of the most beautiful parts of the country, you just cannot recruit and retrain people down here. Just put a word off the Southwest there. And I remember Chris coming down to my practice many years ago and talking about drives we were having to try and persuade people to come down and work in our neck of the woods. And the solution was we opened Plymouth University, and we started doing the optometry course out of Plymouth University. And for the first couple of years, in fact probably still today, the majority of students that attend Plymouth University course are students who've come down to train down here and then to return to Manchester and to Birmingham and to London. And it hasn't solved that problem as yet. We are now starting to have some retention of those students in the area, and I work alongside, I'm lucky enough to work alongside two students who've qualified out of Plymouth, and they're fantastic actually. But that's few and far between. So I guess I don't know the answer to the question. It wasn't particularly, I don't think, as yet, opening a university in the area didn't solve it. So perhaps there is a need to look at other ways of education.
Thoughts?
I live in northwest London, and we definitely don't have a shortage of optometrists in the area that I live and work in. But I mean, I don't know what the answer is, but possible suggestions are maybe offering scholarships to students from non-privileged backgrounds, or to students to attract them to come study optometry, or maybe incentives to optometrists to move to your area so that you can employ them. So yeah, there's a few options. I don't know what the right option is, and obviously there's pros and cons to all options. So yeah, a few things to think about.
Ed?
If we look at the students nowadays, they're very different. I mean, at Bradford, the majority of our students come from a relatively small local area, and you could say that about many universities now. When I was at Aston 20-something years ago, people came from far and wide to go to Aston. And I think the same was reflected across the country. There were half the number of optometry schools back then. And I was the unusual student because I went back home of an evening. I had caring responsibilities for my father. So we have a very much more locally focused student body nowadays. I think to push back a little bit to the employers and to take on your very valid point about the lack of shortage, I think if we looked at the average salary across the country, it's probably gone down. The standard deviation of the salary has probably gone up. And the employers are probably, I hope this is not a provocative comment here, but they're probably paying a smaller amount of salary in central London compared to the North East or Cornwall or far north of Scotland. But that salary probably does level out. And, you know, maybe it is just a supply and demand situation, market forces. If you have, you know, 10 applicants for one optometry post in central London, you pay a certain salary level. If you have half an applicant for an optometry post in the North East or in Devon, you pay a higher salary. But across the piece, it might balance out. Now, the employers might push back on that, and fair enough, if you have an independent practice in the far north of Scotland or in Devon or Cornwall and you're struggling to recruit, that's a big problem for you. I don't know the answer, but I think it's the fact that students do tend to stay closer to home than they ever did before.
Yeah, I spent most of my career in that space and never found the answer, Ed. It just never goes away, does it? It is a perennial challenge, and as you say, market forces may get us somewhere to the answer. I do wonder if you know, the answer will be multifactorial. I think it probably is going to be a combination of all of the things that we talk about. So it's one of the other things that I'm aware of that we tried some years ago, and again, I wonder if maybe its time could come again, is we start to do some work actually going into schools in those areas where there's a shortage of optometrists and start right at the beginning and get people interested in a career in optometry. Because so that when those people do go home, and I think there may be something in that we try to light a fire of interest in those kind of optometric deserts with 14 and 15-year-olds to consider our profession. And you know, but that won't solve it on its own. But it could be another component. I think Chris makes the point that it is a perennial challenge for our profession.
If I could just come back on that, I mean, that was a fabulous piece of work that was done. The Careers in Optics award-winning strategy, you know, and a great piece of work, and maybe something we need to think about recommencing, because I think that would be key. And you know, the public don't understand optometry or ophthalmic dispensing, I don't think, in the UK generally.
Absolutely.
If I say I'm an optometrist, people don't immediately understand what that is or what that means. So I think an educational piece to youngsters would be fabulous.
Yeah, good. Jonathan.
Thank you. So just to pick up on a couple of threads that are taking place online at the moment. So just to confirm, there are still a finite number of bursaries and scholarships available. And in fact, apprenticeships are designed to broaden entry into the profession. Apprenticeships can be used to upskill current professionals. There needs to be, so echoing a couple of the comments, a clear development process in place for all. And underlining here that the process has been lengthy and rigorous in developing the standards for the apprenticeship. So quality is very much high on the emphasis. To give a slightly countered view to that, and picking up on maybe a similar thread to a question we've just had as well, do you believe that an unbiased and diverse grounding in the medical sciences can be provided within a setting that has a strong history of using sight tests as a loss-leading service to sell? Is this in the patient's or the profession's best interest?
Interesting way of phrasing the question. Anyone want to jump into that one? Before I pick on somebody.
The person that wrote it didn't put their name.
But we're all trying to think who it was. Ed, any thoughts?
I mean, just to pick up on the piece around the upskilling piece via the apprenticeship, I think there are a number of... I think when we use the word apprenticeship, we think it means one thing. It means many different things, and there are opportunities now. I think there are the advanced care practitioner, advanced clinical practitioner apprenticeships. I think there are some great programs being done around the upskilling piece across a number of professions, and it includes optometry. This allows someone who's, you know, mid-career, very experienced, who wants to move on, to develop themselves in a very effective way. So I certainly think that is something where apprenticeships monies could be used very well to fill that gap that we have in our system of eye care to get optometrists to do more, to get to the sort of things that Nick has mentioned, get people up to IP level, higher qualifications, that sort of thing.
Isn't it one of the Moorfields postgrad modules?
That's
an apprenticeship.
That's right.
So Moorfields are doing a postgrad optometry module, but it's packaged as an apprenticeship. So it's probably a bit about how we recalibrate our understanding of the A word, I guess.
Yes.
It's probably quite important. Roshni, any thoughts on the environment being
I think the main concerns from us at AOP and certainly myself is, yes, apprenticeships are great depending on the actual situation of the apprenticeship. So in this case, we're talking about optometry students that don't have any knowledge prior to starting this apprenticeship. So obviously our concerns about the patient safety I've already mentioned, but also, yes, there are some commercial concerns, although working in sort of in certain practices, everyone's going to have a different experience, similar to some of the concerns that our pre-reggers have when they contact us at the AOP. And sometimes there are commercial concerns with regards to working in certain practices where sometimes the best interest of the pre-reg at that stage is not what the practice have in mind. So yes, there would be there is some concern that there might be these students might sort of be pressured into seeing patients or doing things that they're not qualified or confident in doing at that stage for retail reasons.
Max,
I think, I mean, obviously one of the things is that the bigger companies or the companies are paying into the apprenticeship fund. They have to pay an amount of money in there. And obviously they want to access this money to get it back out again. And I think it's not a suggestion I've come across before, but the thought of actually using that at a higher level to provide training, particularly in the world. I mean, my big thing is extended services and upskilling guys who have got the qualification to do new things, and the thought of presenting them to them and saying, do you know what, there's guys that I know who would love to go on and do the higher certain glaucoma, for example, things like that, but it's costly. Now, why not actually, if the problem with the apprenticeship is, you know, there's so much feedback that people don't want that, we'll open it up to these guys who've already got the qualifications in order to access that money as a training fund. And I do think that's a very, very sensible suggestion.
Go on, Nick. Yeah.
Two things. We mercilessly approach careers evenings in and around our area on a regular basis. And we've seen 5 or 6 now local school kids have gone on to optometry. One of them I've ended up employing. The others I haven't. They've gone somewhere else, but I don't really mind that. And I would say that the people who are struggling with recruitment are conspicuous by their absence at any school event. Okay, that's the first point. The second thing is, in terms of what you're recruiting somebody to join or to be an employee, in effect, when somebody joins our practice, they're joining a 3-year program, and their contract is that by the end of 3 years, you've got to have at least 2 high qualifications and be IP qualified, otherwise the job's no longer there. Okay, so we are going to train you. Now that costs us. I can't access any of that money, but the benefits to our patients, and what's more, the benefits to our local services, and it's seen an upskilling in the local other practices in terms of what they're able to do in the interaction with our hospital. It benefits absolutely everybody. So I would say that's really where the focus of this money should come. And if these companies want to upskill their workforce, it's that end of the spectrum, not the other end. There isn't a mischief at the other end of a problem with recruitment, because look at how many schools are trying to be opened.
I'm conscious that we have other subjects we want to talk about, but I'm going to just challenge my panel in one area, because the essence of the interest in this area is around standards. And I guess we've heard the statement from the GOC about their involvement. I suppose, you know, as we sit here today, now that we've kind of got that view from the GOC, we've started to surface some of the concerns and perhaps some of the mechanisms by which apprenticeships can and can't, you know, we can see a way through or not, etc. I guess I would just want to come to the group around, as we're sitting here now, how are you feeling about that initial concern around standards? Are we confident that we've got a mechanism in place in the industry to protect standards, or, you know, does that assuage some of the concerns? I'm going to go to Max first on that.
I'm not sure it does. I'm not sure at the moment there's enough information out there to give a real informed opinion on that, to be honest. I mean, I think there's a real recognition from everyone that standards have to be maintained, patient care is the top priority. And I think, provided that is the main discussion, the main focus around the table for it, I think that's a great thing. But I don't necessarily know at the moment as if there's enough information out there to give a definitive judgment on your question, Richard. Sorry.
That's absolutely fine. Ashley.
No, I completely agree. I think that, yes, I think everybody agrees that patient safety is number one, most important. And I mean, what the GOC have said is actually reassuring that, yes, they agree that standards are important and they will not approve anything that's sort of below standard or not the standard that we're currently at. And I think that if they can find a way that it would work and sort of patient safety is not an issue, then it'd be good to hear what it is. I don't know how they can, but it'd be interesting if they can come up with something. We need more information.
That assurance. Fine. Ed.
Yeah, well, the GOC have a very clear remit to protect the public. Clearly, anything that goes to a route to registration has to satisfy those standards, and that has the scrutiny of the GOC and the academic community and the clinical community looking in, who are able to comment on these things. The new sets of standards, the new learning outcomes are being developed now, I believe. So that is an area where we need to have some input and make comment. But clearly, any route to registration has to fulfil those basic requirements.
And I guess from a college perspective, the way things are done currently, you'd be a strong advocate for.
Yeah, absolutely. For a standard examination process that all optometrists that are on the register can meet that standard and do those particular competencies.
And in terms of the future of that standard?
Well, I think clearly it needs to move in an upward direction. It's a very different job to when I qualified. Certainly 20 years ago. It's not that long ago, but it's got a different move towards us taking on more responsibilities, and we should have an ambition to upskill and improve ourselves. But we have to keep that minimum at least where it is now.
Okay. Good stuff. Thank you. I think we'll move on to the second subject, if that's okay. For this, I would like to invite Emily McCormack from Optometry Today to ask the second question.
Hello. I guess just thinking about new contact lens wearers and managing their expectations in order to reduce dropouts, what advice can you all share on how practitioners can meet and exceed their expectations, both before, during and after the initial fit-in?
Fantastic. Max?
It's an interesting question. I think certainly over the last 20 years of being in practice as a contact lens optician, I think the expectations from patients has definitely got more challenging, without a doubt. I think looking at colleagues that I know within the profession and what I try and do myself, I guess, is never, ever, ever overpromise and underdeliver, because you're starting off on the absolute wrong foot there. One of the things in the practice that I've been in, we've had this kind of new fit appointment. Now, the new fit appointment is for many people, is kind of people sitting there and you think you've got 25 minutes or whatever it may well be to get all your measurements down, get a set of notes together, perhaps even dash into your cupboard and get some new lenses out. And on reflection, actually, I don't think that's what a new fit appointment should be about. If you want to get it right for the patient, 3/4 of that new fit appointment should be about talking to the patient. It should be about communication, and it should be listening. Because I know myself in the past where I've gone off on a tangent with a patient, and I think I know what they want, and I think I know what's best for that patient, and the patient's politely sitting there and it's not what they want and it's not the best thing for them. And I think it's that time to sit back, listen, and just try and narrow down the options and have a conversation about how long the process is going to take. Patients think they're going to come in, half an hour later they're going to leave the practice with a set of contact lenses in, and it doesn't work like that. The second point, and I think the difference in practices that get it right and practices that don't, is it's a three-way process. It is the practitioner, it is the patient, and it is the team within the practice. And the practice team, and I'm sure most people in this room will have had the experience of you're sitting with your patient, you've done the contact lens fit, the vision's fantastic, the patients actually love it, everything is fine, and you wave them goodbye to say, I'll see you again in a couple of weeks' time just to do your first checkup, and you never see them again. And the reason is they've left the room, and the conversation that's taken place between one of the consultants outside or somebody on reception or whatever your setup is just hasn't been great. And they've left, they've no real idea of how to look after the lenses, they've not had a clear conversation about why they're coming back, the costs haven't been explained to them, it's just broken down. But in practices where you got it right and you're handing that patient over to someone who knows what they're talking about, is enthusiastic about contact lenses as hopefully the practitioner is, and is as enthusiastic as that patient is at that point, can't go too far wrong, to be perfectly honest. And it does involve things like a follow-up telephone call after you've done a teach. Why not phone them a week later and say, how are you getting on? Because it's amazing the amount of times where they say, I'm really struggling, I've given up. I say, look, come back in, we'll have another go. But it is. So communication and a great practice team.
I love the point about listening. I remember I was once given some wise advice. Richard, we have two ears and one mouth. We should use them in that proportion.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's, it feels like that's a great mantra for kind of a great setup around contact lens wear.
Yeah.
Roshni.
Yeah, no, so I completely agree with what you're saying. And when I see a patient in practice, I spend the majority of the first appointment talking to them, and I ask them, the first thing I say to them, why have you come in? Why do you want contact lenses? Do you want them for social wear? Do you want them for sport? Do you want them for wearing every day at work? So first of all, I sort of establish with the patient what they want the contact lenses for. Then I say to them, what do you have any ideas in mind? Do you know what contact lenses you want? Because often they come in, they're like, yes, I want daily disposables. Straight away, then you already know. You don't need to talk about monthlies or 2 weeklies, or you can if you feel that it's appropriate. But that's why I ask them straight away. So it's almost like we're making the decision together, and obviously I can advise. So I say to them, okay, well, you want daily disposable lenses to wear like 5 days a week. Maybe we should go for something that allows more oxygen through. So a silicone hydrogel would be better for you for this reason. So they obviously understand why I'm recommending something. If they're a presbyope, for example, I may talk to them about the different options that are available. So I say, these are your 3 options. This is the benefit of this option, but this option might be better because you do this. I often talk to them about their lifestyle and their job. So they feel like they're actually being listened to, and you're sort of tailoring your advice to them and their lifestyle, which they like, and it's more specific to them, and they're much less likely to stop wearing or drop out from wearing the contact lenses because it's not working for them. I also explain the process to them, so I say, this is how the process works. This is your first appointment. I'm going to talk to you about the lenses, check that you're suitable. If I've got the lenses in stock, we'll put them in your eyes, check they fit and that you can see in them. Then we'll book you in for a teach. Then we'll get you back in a couple of weeks. So they understand this is why I'm coming back in. It's not like, oh, I've got another appointment again. I don't know what I'm doing. Why am I going in again? Yeah. So then I explain the process to them. I often do go through the price with them, because there's nothing worse than you've done a whole fitting and then you tell them what the price is and they're like, oh no, I don't want to pay that much for the contact lens. This is a waste of time. It's not really very good. So I actually talk to them about the price, and we use that as part of the decision making when we're deciding what lens to go for. So they know the price, they know the process, they know why they're coming in. And then when they sort of are trialling the lenses, I say to them, look, if it's not working for you, that's fine, just ring me. We'll talk about, there are other options available. So if it's not working, you're struggling, they don't feel comfortable, that's fine, ring me and we will think of something else. And these are the days that I work. And often I think that's quite good, because otherwise, like you said, they might go away, it doesn't work, they don't come back. And they don't tell you it's not working, when often we can just solve it by... And the other thing also is, for example, multifocal patients, I do obviously from the start, I say to them, it is quite common that you need to come back in a few times. We might need to make tweaks to your prescription depending on your lifestyle, because you might come in and say, these lenses are great for driving, but I still can't read my computer screen at work. And I often explain to them how multifocal lenses work, so that they understand that there is a small degree of compromise in your vision when you have multifocals. That's what we are expecting. We're not expecting you to be able to see the smallest writing on your food labels. That is going to be a bit tricky. So at least they know from the start. Otherwise, they come back in and they say, yes, my vision's great, but I can't see this. But if you explain to them from the beginning, you're not expecting them to be able to see the tiniest writing, then they'll come back and say, yes, the lenses were great. And yes, it's a little bit tricky then, but I already knew that. So yeah, I think that's the way I manage my patients, and it works pretty well.
And Ed, as an educationalist, I've written 2 words down based on Max and Roshni's answers. Roshni talked about personalised, so this is about the communication. But Max used a word that was powerful for me, which was enthusiastic. So I guess the challenge, I think, to the educationalists is, I think there's a paradox here that apart from those odd occasions in a clinician's working week where they spot a life-changing condition and we fundamentally change people's lives, I don't think there's anything we do as a profession that changes people's lives as positively as fitting people with contact lenses. It's life-changing work for the person. So how do we get people enthusiastic and passionate as clinicians about fitting lenses?
It's a great question, and it is life-changing. And if you're listening, Jan and Arthur, you were my first contact lens opticians. Thank you. I'm -8 and -7. So for me, contact lenses were indeed life-changing, absolutely life-changing. I think we need to understand what they can do for people. It depends on the patient, doesn't it? Yep. I'm an easy patient because wearing contact lenses allows me to have a totally different lifestyle compared to spectacles. I can do a lot more with as a lens wearer than as a spectacle wearer in terms of cycling, all of these different things, you know. But it is about communication. It's been great to hear mention of the team aspect of that in the practice. All members of the team educated to a level where each member of the team can have a good conversation around contact lenses and reinforce things that are said in the consulting room. Patients forget, don't they? And you know, for a patient, it's sometimes a little bit traumatic. Someone putting that lens onto your eye, someone else putting something onto your eye for the first time can be a little bit scary for a patient sometimes. So written information is useful, information leaflets around the lenses and about what to do, but reinforcement from practice staff, I think, is absolutely key. And if that level of enthusiasm around contact lenses can be spread around, I notice we've got Brian in the room who has got some great enthusiasm around contact lens use and wear in his practice. That sort of thing, practice-wide enthusiasm around it and reinforcement, I think, is fabulous. And we try to do that at undergraduate level in the universities to get people keen, and it's great to have support from all of the different manufacturers around that to tell us around their great new products.
I'm going to go into the audience in a moment, but I just wanted to come back to Max about one point, because the way in which the question is phrased is about retention, and I guess in this day and age, there's never been more opportunity for lens wearers to hemorrhage away from us. And with my OCCS hat on, I get examples of patients who get very frustrated that they think we make it hard for them to get their product. But Max, I know that Abdo have just amended some guidance recently, which I think is quite useful. And it'd be useful for people to know, because I think this is an interesting path.
We have, and we took an opportunity. I mean, I'm sure most people in practice have had that moment where you've kind of come around the corner to reception, and there's a very irate patient kind of holding onto one end of a box of contact lenses, and the very determined receptionist holding onto the other, and one wants them right now and they're not going to give them because they have a version in their head of what the rules or the law about contact lenses is, and I have been on the end of numerous of my patients who've said, who've basically only booked an appointment to have a moan about the fact that they can't actually get their contact lenses, and they're not quite sure why they're back with me, and neither am I. Neither of us really know why they're back. So we had a little look at it, and within Abdo, the advice and guidance was very sound, but it was very sound based on lens materials and fitting practices and the way we worked 10 years ago. And we looked at it and just thought, actually, this just does not work. And there was a degree of people of input when we wanted to try and look at it and change it. And people were saying, well, what would you do in this scenario? And, you know, this patient's got this, and what would you do in that scenario? Because this patient's got this thing, and they've got this type of lens, and they do this type of things with it. And you know what? We came to just look, let's be pragmatic. The best person to decide this is going to be the practitioner. It's going to be the person that fitted those contact lenses who knows what that patient is. And that's what we've done. We've changed our advice and guidance. There isn't a kind of a 12-month cut-off whereby, you know, if anyone goes into 12 months and 5 minutes, that's it, we're going to seize your lenses. It is now, it's the practitioner who makes the judgment. Obviously, there is rules and regulations with, you know, the GC, the in-date sight test, et cetera, and I totally understand that. But when it comes to what you're going to write at the bottom of that record card for when you want to see that patient again, it's the practitioner's judgment on the day based on their knowledge, their degree of assessment of the risk factors, the lens modality, et cetera, it's down to the practitioner.
From a college perspective?
Well, again, we've got lots of training materials for our members on contact lens, you know, fitting and various articles that can help practitioners, you know, inform their patients in the best possible way. It's really key. Really key.
I suppose the Nathan Ephron, Phil Morgan paper a couple of years ago, yep. I hesitate to say the game changer, but I suppose it probably for the first time gave us an evidence base, published base to say, you know, you can go to 2-year recall on daily disposables, and I think that probably started to liberate us to enable us to do some of the things that you've been talking about.
I mean, you know, I'm sure you know most people have come across examples of somebody who would be wearing I use a daily disposable 1 day a week to do a certain event. You know, they go to a tea dance or whatever it may well be, and they're wearing them for 3 hours, and every 12 months they're coming back in and they're saying, well, I've actually only worn 14 pairs since you last saw me. I think everything's okay. And you've got to make a judgment on that and say, actually, do you know what? I think it's safe for you to probably be put down on 24-month recall. However, with the rider that if you have any concerns, you come back and see us before. It's an open door policy.
Is that pragmatic?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Hi, Cheryl.
Just a question. Well, no, really a statement for the panel. I think there's been a lot of investment over the years from a research perspective with regards to dropout rates. So I'm just going to pick up on Emily's question and ask you directly about retention. The evidence suggests that people, if they're going to drop out of contact lenses for the first time, it's within a 2-week window. And so it's quite a really obvious thing for us to do, and pick up your point, Max, about working with front of house staff. You know, what is it the panel think they should do at that 2-week point? Because that is the point that's been proven within research as the magic number. And I think a lot of practitioners are missing that trick. And I think there's a massive opportunity for us to embrace retention at that point.
Yeah, well, I think it's about investment in a little bit more time, a little bit more engagement with the patient. The phone call, how are you doing? You know, great thing. We do that with our orthokeratology patients that we see at the university, and we give them a lot of care because it's a reasonably complex thing, I guess, for the patient, a strange thing to do to wear a lens overnight, and we talk to them a lot. We ring them, and the retention rate is pretty good. So I think a little bit more investment of time and a little bit more communication, and again from across the practice team. It doesn't have to be the optometrist or the contact lens optician doing it. It could be other members of practice staff getting involved in that conversation, provided they're saying, you know, from the same sort of hymn sheet. But I think that's key. Ring the patient up a few times. How are you doing?
Because I think your comments about communication are really refreshing, but I think we have to be more proactive. I think waiting for them to, oh, you can call me whenever you're free, is probably not, you know, they're very busy people and it'll just slip off the radar. So for me, it's a plea about being proactive to talk to them in that 2-week point. Brian?
If it's me now, then I think the 2 weeks is too late. I think you've blown it by then because they've already got a disheartened, unhappy patient. Our review of their progresses within a couple of days so that you've got easier things to deal with. But actually, it's even before then, because we don't let anybody go into any form of lens until we've analysed fully their tear flow and their tears, which we can in the technologies that are around now. You look at the Jews report, and there's so many things that can go wrong. And many people may have heard me say this before, but our contact lenses, we're in a particular building with a certain brand, and some of their lenses and all of the other companies make lenses in such a clever way that it's never the fault of the lens. It's always the patient who lets us down. And I am absolutely adamant at telling that patient that unless we get it right before we put this marvelous piece of technology and apply it to you, then they can go wrong. They can have a real problem, but it's our fault in actually not judging that they were going to be suitable beforehand. So it starts before the 2 weeks. It starts before the lens goes into that eye to see what's going on.
I was mindful as well. I was just about to say before Brian spoke, I'm mindful that all of the good ideas in this area may not emanate from this stage. So I was really keen for the studio audience. If anyone's got any top tips they want to share with the world of optometry that are watching online, I'm sure there'll be people viewing with bated breath.
So just one point I want to raise: is it contact lens retention? Is it not partly an issue of time? I see a lot of practitioners at the moment who don't have time to spend with their patients. They've got 20 minutes per patient. They haven't got time to listen. They haven't got time to act on anything that the patient says. But also own brand lenses. So you work in certain practices which push an own brand lens, and you have staff above you that will direct you to the lens that you're expected to fit, not supposed to fit, but expected to fit. And I think that, along with a lack of time, results in a poor retention of patients.
Roshni, do you want to come in on that? Thoughts?
That's quite true. It's difficult. I mean, in the practice that I work in an independent, so I have free rein to fit whatever I want to, which, I mean, as a practitioner myself, I would always fit what I think is most suitable, but I completely agree that in some practices, yes, you might be pressured into fitting a certain type of lens. And that is difficult, and you as a practitioner have to do and recommend what you think is best for your patient, and if that's not the lens that you are expected to fit, then that's not the lens you're expected to fit. I mean, luckily for me, I don't have any pressure like that at all, and it's a really difficult one. And with regards to time, yes, I mean, I would say that the majority of the first appointment is talking to the patient, and it's really difficult when you don't have enough time to do that, but what can you do? Just run late. You've got to talk to your patient. That's so important. That's the fundamental of it. Otherwise, they don't feel like you've listened to them. They don't have that confidence in you that you've actually sat down and had a chat with them about it. So, yeah, I completely agree that time is an issue. And yes, you've got to fit the lens that's suitable for your patient.
Okay, I'm going to raise the bar a little bit in terms of the contact lens world, because we talked about the kind of that initial fitting. For the next question, I'm going to ask Chris Bennett to present the next question, which, as I say, will just raise the bar in the world of contact lenses.
Yes. We're talking about innovative designs, multifocals, myopic control, extended depth of focus. I mean, all great lenses, products that we write about in Optician all the time. But they're not being used in great numbers. So really the question is, how can we promote those innovative designs, but also, more importantly, how on a practical basis can we get the retail optical business that meets the people who are supposed to wear these things? How can we get the retail optical business to promote, sell and fit more of those new designs?
Start with Ed.
Okay, well, if I could pick up on the myopia management piece, I mean, that is clearly a huge area of growth now. I mentioned I was an 8 diopter myope, so I've got a 125 times odds ratio risk of myopic maculopathy compared to an emmetrope. And those of you that saw the great CET piece from my PhD supervisor, Bernard Gilmartin, at Optometry Tomorrow a year before last with his surgeon he's had myopic maculopathy because of his myopia. We know the profound effects of myopia now. We're understanding that much better. So I think it's a very easy sell, for want of a better word, to get that argument across around the use of new lenses that are showing great promise in controlling, managing myopia. We need to understand that a lot better, and perhaps a bit more fundamentally, we need to understand the rise in myopia prevalence more. We don't understand that fully at all yet, so we need to understand that. So I think information, if we're looking for sources of information, I mean, we've got the college guidelines, we've got the college information leaflet, patient leaflet, and we've got for the practitioners who want to read the IMI, Institute for Myopia Intervention, International Myopia Institute papers that were published last year. Really, really good sources of evidence for people to back up what they're doing. I think it's about explaining things properly to patients, explaining the potential therapeutic interventions from the new lens designs, and then having a process where we either do that work ourselves or refer on to someone who's prepared to do that for the suitable patient, the patient that is at risk. I think that's a relatively easy piece. When it gets a little bit more complex, when the intervention's a bit more complex, perhaps orthokeratology, that needs more communication with the patient, needs more communication with the parents. It's usually children that we're dealing with from a myopia management point of view, although I did progress 3 diopters as an adult, by the way. It's usually kids. So again, good communication and time to spend with the parents to explain things well, and to signpost them to the multitude of websites that are out there at the moment, some of them pretty good quality that are explaining things reasonably well, but again, give them written information to take away and read and digest, and then come in for a full discussion with us and be prepared to put the time in for that.
Thanks, Ed. Roshni.
So yeah, I think that's a really good point. And just to pick up a little bit more on what you said, Ed, I think that the key to this is education, because if an eye care practitioner doesn't have the knowledge behind myopia control, they don't feel confident in fitting myopia control lenses, multifocals, or they don't feel confident that the knowledge that they've got, they don't feel confident talking to patients about it, they're not going to talk to patients about it because they don't feel confident. So I think in this case, education is absolutely key. Now, we've got, as a practitioner, I think that really you should be proactive. I mean, contact lenses are changing all the time, as is the industry, and I think that some practitioners can sometimes be stuck in a rut and they do the same thing because that's what they know and they don't further their knowledge. And I think that we should be proactive to further our knowledge, and go and learn about these different types of lenses that are available. And also in terms of practices, sort of how can sort of practice directors help with this? And I think building good relationships with like contact lens companies and the reps that come over, because the reps can do in-house training. They can come in and show you how the lenses work so that you can then feel confident talking to your patients about it. And also maybe forming like a support network. So let's say you do have some training on some lenses and then you try and fit it and it goes all wrong, or something happens and you don't know what to do about it. Having someone you can maybe contact and say, this is what happened, what can we do about it? So I think that would help quite a lot, because otherwise how are we going to start fitting these lenses when practitioners don't feel confident talking about them?
Given this question a bit of thought, actually, what's quite interesting is the only bit of research, it was a few years ago, that shows that the majority of contact lenses in the UK are fitted by contact lens opticians, and yet the majority of training expenditure by the contact lens companies is directed at optometrists, which is fine, there's nothing wrong with that, and I'm not saying take the money away. But if I was sitting on an advertising budget, it would occur to me that I wouldn't kind of spend the money on the wrong target audience. But there we go. But I'm not an advertising person, and there's cleverer people in the room who know this kind of thing. So you're probably spending a bit of money training people who work within a business model where they're not getting the opportunity to recommend and to fit contact lenses the way they'd like. Now, I work obviously for Abdo, And I would hope that all our contact lens opticians that we train are skilled in a wide range of lens fitting. But out in the real world, what they're doing is they're fitting soft daily contact lenses. And what we need to do is change the actual business model, which would encourage the companies to actually look and encourage them to start looking at presbyopic fits, to start having an action plan about what are they going to do about myopia management. Myopia management is, without a shadow of a doubt, one of the biggest things that I'm going to see in my career as a contact lens optician. I really do think it's that important. And if we don't get it right now and start talking about it, then there's going to be huge problems in the future. And what might drive change, and I was talking to some friends about this the other night, what might drive change actually, for all the wrong reasons, is the fear of litigation. What is going to happen? I've got 4 kids. If I was thinking in 6 years' time, if one of my daughters came through and was -7 and someone had said, "Oh, did they not say to you about this at the opticians about 5 years ago?" Do you know what? I'd be a very, very unhappy parent. So we actually need to have a look at a business model that is actually going to say, do you know what, myopia management, it's an opportunity. It's the right thing to do anyway. Morally, it is absolutely the right thing to be talking about to parents, to children, to actually engage with every single child at the risk of myopia, to have that conversation and, of course, make sure it's noted. Really importantly, it's in the notes. But we have an obligation to do that. And what we need to do is persuade the companies and the manufacturers, etc., to actually back us up with that, give us the education, make sure we understand what's going on, give us the opportunity, and make sure for the multiples and the independents out there that financially this is going to work for them as well. Because if it doesn't, it'll go absolutely nowhere.
I'm going to come back to a point that you made there, Max, because I think you mentioned the fear of litigation. I hate to use fear as a motivator to drive change, but I agree with you. I sit here as a myope, married to a myope with 2 daughters that are myopes who are probably too old to benefit from myopia control. But you're dead right. If Alison and I and the girls were 10 years younger than we are today with what's available, I think you're right. I think we're getting to a point, and I'd be interested in the panel view about how close are we to the point where that becomes a risk. Because I do remember some years ago, and it was one of these kind of, I don't know whether it was an urban myth, I think it really happened, but there's a great story years ago about the barrister who successfully sued their optometrist for not proactively mentioning silicone hydrogel lenses. Mm-hmm. And won his case because his expectation was, my eye care practitioner makes me aware of the best things that are available, and you haven't been fit, these have been available and you haven't been fitting with them. And actually, paradoxically, that was a great thing for the profession, because it did make people behave slightly differently for a while. So I wonder how close are we to our barrister moment with myopia management.
If you think about it, Richard, how easy would it be to see, go home, a moment you go home from work and there may be an advert on television and it would say, have you been injured at work today? Mm. And you think, well, actually, no, I haven't, so that's fine. But, they're out there touting for business. But how easy is it to put the advert out there, are you a bit short-sighted? And you think to yourself, yes, I am. And you think, therefore, I'm a bit short-sighted. It can't be anything to do with me. It must be the advice or the lack of advice from that optician 7, 8 years ago. And it may be that will drive change. And that may be no bad thing.
What are your thoughts in terms of how close are you? Because I know you've been passionate about this subject for a long time. Absolutely. How close are we to it becoming, I guess, mainstream, and therefore carry that expectation from the public that we talk about this stuff?
I think where we are currently, we have to have the conversation with patients. It's something you must do, even if you're not prepared to get involved yourself. If you feel that's beyond your skill set, you have to have that conversation, and you have to signpost patients appropriately. It's difficult to say, isn't it? When are we going to get to that point where it's like amblyopia therapy, isn't it? There was a time when an amblyopic eye was just a lazy eye and there was nothing we could do about it, and there's a kid of 2 years old, 3 years old, and there's an amblyopic eye, or there's nothing we can do. Now it's a very different situation, of course. I see us probably being in a similar position at some point in the future. I don't know when that will be. The evidence base is key to all of this. There's lots of evidence coming out on almost a monthly basis now, showing efficacy of studies. We still don't fully know the term effects. We don't know, crucially, about cessation of any treatment. So if we put a child into a contact lens, we don't fully know what happens when we take the child out of that lens. And what's always at the back of my mind, it's a different mechanism, is the atropine work, where sort of the first ATOM study where you had kids on atropine for 2 years and it held up their myopia progression. They stopped the atropine and they progressed by almost the same amount as the placebo group. Now, I don't think the same thing would happen in a contact lens. I don't think, but I don't know, and we don't fully understand that yet. So that the crucial point is around the collection of data, and that's where clinicians can really get involved with us. You've got the patient base, so great, get in touch and let's do some studies together. That will be really key, that underpinning scientific evidence behind efficacy and safety and when to stop the treatment, I think is really important.
And Roshni, I guess in high street practice, what's the level of interest like in the public? Is there an awareness around this?
So there's, in the practice that I work in, we we use my sight lenses and we do orthokeratology, and there is quite a lot of awareness, I would say, and obviously we have patients that are currently on, for example, Ortho-K, and then they have brothers and sisters that are myopic, and we get recommendations. So we do have a lot of awareness about it. Sometimes patients ask me about it as well, and I think as practitioners we do have a duty of care to keep up to date with our knowledge and know about these sorts of treatments, especially if it's becoming more and more popular. And the other thing that I also wanted to just say is, as a practitioner myself, I mean, I've been qualified less than 10 years, and if you think about it, I've got another 30 years, I hope, in this profession, and I mean, this is the future, so why wouldn't I go and learn about it? This is what is going to be an optometry in the next 10, 20, 30 years, and I've still got all that way to go. So I think that as practitioners, especially ones that have just qualified, or I think you need to go and look this up and learn about it, because this is the future of optometry.
I haven't got that many years ahead of me, but I share your passion for, I could paint a picture in my mind of it almost defining the role of optometry in society, being managing myopia for the population. It could be the thing.
Could I just come back in on one point, very, very important point there, and actually giving the person the right intervention, because with more research we may find that we can actually use various markers to identify what technique to apply to a child, and that child might need Ortho-K, child might need a multifocal lens with a combination of a low-dose atropine product. That area of refinement, I think, is probably somewhere where we will go, and that is when it becomes really exciting. Giving the correct therapeutic intervention, and another piece we really need to think about again is instrumentation. The clinical instrumentation at the moment for measuring the primary thing that we're altering here, which is the axial length of the eye. The vast majority of practitioners can't measure in their practice, so we really need to plea out there to bring the cost of this vital instrumentation down so we can monitor much more closely the progression of myopia.
It'll be on your iPhone in 2 years. Jonathan. Thank you.
Going back to Chris's question, in some ways, not just myopia control, but any specialist lenses, I think education is the key. We need to keep ourselves educated about all the options for our patients, whether it's myopia control, whether it's semiscleral lenses, whether it's keratoconic fits. We need to keep up to date. If all we have in our toolbox is a hammer, everything starts looking like a nail. And with one point with regard to myopia control, I understand a lot of practitioners are worried that we can't specify who will benefit and who won't. Would we expect our doctor to talk to us about giving up smoking only at the point when we're getting out of breath?
Absolutely. Nick.
So I want to make two points. One's a little minor criticism on the multidisciplinary panel you've got up there. We haven't got the BCLA up there. It's a contact lens meeting, and the BCLA is the multidisciplinary body that does represent everything from industry to medicine to dispensing optics, etc. And the other point is, we've talked about other higher qualifications, etc. At the moment, one of my optoms, who's our go-to lead in contact lenses, is looking for doing the higher qualification that was the equivalent of the DCLP, not one university is running that course at the moment, okay? It's zero, okay? So the sex appeal of continuing education in contact lenses has disappeared. You go to the BCLA meeting, the most fantastic meeting run in Europe, I think so in Europe, but look at the meeting. Of the people that go there, probably 1/3 or less are actual practicing UK practitioners, okay? Not the bulk of people going to that meeting. There's no additional levels of education available at the moment. And yet the BCLA, in particular through that meeting 25 years ago, and the college through the DCLP, they were the flag bearers of CET before it ever existed. Where's it all gone?
It's a great challenge. I didn't know the BCLA wanted to come in on that. So.
I didn't say anything.
No.
That's not like
Is there anything else from the floor? Back to Chris. I mean, Chris, do you want to come back in on that in terms of?
No, I suppose I've worked. Sorry. No, it's really more from a straight product perspective. I mean, I know the whole sort of mum and apple pie thing of communication, information, education. You know, that's all well and good, but in the real world, people aren't getting the latest products. I many years ago used to work in the car industry, and all the people that drive cars are waiting for the new car to arrive, whereas in this industry, you've got 12,000 optometrists and CLOs who are giving people essentially a 1985 Ford Cortina to go and drive in because they're just not using the latest products. And I just wondered how that culture, how you can change that culture within the people that do the job, whether it's locums working in practice so you don't get that continuity of care with fittings and things like that, or whether optometrists are a sort of a risk-averse lot and just put people back in what they came out of because they didn't complain about it. So it wasn't really about myopia control. It was about why doesn't this profession use the latest products on the market?
Okay, I think we've got time for one more question, which I think Jonathan's going to share with us from an online audience.
Thank you very much, Richard. And just to echo, there are a few comments that were coming in online, very much in keeping with what Chris has just said, which is if I'm working in practice and I'm not in an environment that's encouraging me to support this, then what am I meant to do? Maybe one for us to reflect upon. So the question, again, this is taken from our poll of questions submitted prior to the event, and this is the second big theme that came through. It has been noted by many that the number of ECPs, practitioners attending conferences and educational meetings has been declining over recent years. It could be argued that the needs, expectations and preferred way of learning and developing our professional knowledge and skills is changing with each generation of clinicians that are qualifying. What do the panel think about the requirements of how practitioners are required to demonstrate that they've received their development? And perhaps is it a question of CET maintaining a minimum standard, or should we be more progressive and think CPD and challenging ourselves to be the best we can be?
Because there's a question around, I guess, policy, what I will do is, before we go to the panel, I will kind of, by proxy, bring in the GOC view into the room. So again, Alistair very kindly did share a comment on this. So the GOC comment on the whole thing around CET is that we've been reviewing the CET scheme to understand how it can evolve to help meet the challenges of the future. We've heard from stakeholders that the CET current scheme maintains minimum standards rather than promotes a culture of continuing learning and development throughout a registrant's career. So moving forward, we want a more progressive scheme that better instills the concept of lifelong learning and development, and to move away from what is perceived to be an overly prescriptive tick-box system. This would mean giving registrants more control and the ability to tailor this to their own scope of practice. This is likely to involve rebranding the scheme so that it is described as a continual professional development or CPD scheme, aligning the scheme with the standards of practice for optometrists and dispensing opticians, and a greater focus on reflective practice throughout the 3-year cycle. The changes that we are aiming to make will also help future-proof the scheme, making it more agile, flexible to keep pace with, for example, changing scopes of practice and technological changes. So, CT change, Roshni, thoughts?
So the first thing, I definitely agree with each generation of clinicians that are qualifying, the preferred ways of learning are definitely changing. So with the advancing technology like iPhones, iPads, that sort of thing, we are seeing more like webinars and podcasts and this sort of thing. And I think that that's really good because, like I said earlier, I work 5.5 days a week, and it's really hard for me to find the time to actually go to a CET event, and which I do often, and I'm proactive and I do that. But sometimes it's quite nice to sit in the evening for 1 hour and do a webinar from the comfort of my home and still continue with my knowledge and learn about new things. So from that side of things, yes, I do agree, and I do think that is good. I think that it's good that practitioners do attend CET events to network and meet other people and share ideas. But also in terms of like webinars, I think that a lot of practitioners find it less daunting to ask questions when you are sitting behind your computer rather than putting your hand up and sort of speaking in front of everyone. So I think there's pros and cons to both. And with regards to CT, I personally do feel a more progressive approach is great. However, and that's the type of clinician that I am, I go to CET events not because I do want to get the CET points, but that's not the driver for me. I don't go because, I want to get 6 points. I will go because I want to go and learn about something. But unfortunately, I do think that there are practitioners that do CET for the purpose of, I just need to get my 6 CET points this year, rather than actually going there to learn. So I think that if there was a more sort of continuous professional development, I think that there would be some practitioners that do continue keep up to date with their education, and there'll be some that maybe don't. And I think that the CT system that we've got now sort of forces those practitioners to keep up to date with their knowledge, even if they're only getting the minimum amount of CT points. So I think there's pros and cons to both, but we've got to think about what's realistic.
Yeah, well, I suppose if I was to play devil's advocate, I would try and say, so I guess let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater, because actually what we've currently got does at least force a consistent kind of level across it that gets it, and people understand it and like it. So there's a bit of baby in bathwater, I guess, isn't there, around what the GOC are talking about doing. Max?
Richard, I think you're absolutely right. It does force it, but it forces a minimum standard. And it's awful, because actually the type of education, everyone's going for you have to achieve the minimum amount of points. I don't think anyone in the room wants to do the minimum amount of thing that they can for a patient, or just have enough minimum amount of knowledge to get them through a working day. And I think this is why I'd be a big fan of CPD. I think CPD is a completely different world. It will have challenges, without a shadow of a doubt. CPD is a different way of thinking about things, but we're moving away. We're moving into more research and widening the scope of practice. There's many people in the room, I'm sure, who last year attended some CET on something that doesn't affect their day-to-day practice. I'm a CLO. Best bit of CET I went to last year actually was on latest development in surgical techniques for glaucoma. Absolutely fascinating. Nothing to do with what I do on a day-to-day basis, to be perfectly honest. But however, as a spin-off from that, there was definitely learnings that I could, if a patient was to talk to me about certain things, it meant that my field of knowledge had expanded, and it was very good, and that was a very positive thing. There's hidden costs with CET that people don't consider, and it was really refreshing what you said about webinars. If you're at home, you can sit down. There is no cost to sitting and watching a webinar. And for certain types of lectures, they are the best way of learning stuff. And you're quite right, people can access and answer the questions, and childcare costs or travel costs in there. But certain parts, I think, of webinars don't work, which is where your peer discussion comes in. Or you can relate a lecture that you saw a few months ago to how you're actually delivering it in practice. So I still think from that point of view, there is advantages to things like that. But I definitely think, we should be pushing and promoting CPD.
One of the things I picked up on straight away was Roshni, you said about and watch something for an hour, and it's interesting how we've all now got into that currency as chunks of an hour. And I was thinking, crikey, with a YouTube generation coming through, that's a long time for people to sit still these days. And even that's going to have to change, isn't it? Why can't we get to a point where you could watch a 10-minute clip on YouTube and make some notes about, so this is what I'm going to do differently, and get that into your portfolio? So we've got to change the mould, haven't we?
I'm just thinking about recent stuff that with the WOPEC lectures, for example, the WOPEC lecture on minor eye conditions, where you have partial part of a video, stops, multi-choice question, and then bit of a video learning, multi-choice question. It's really great way of learning, really effective.
And I'm going to go to Ed for one last comment before we wrap up.
Yeah, about a month ago actually, it was a great privilege to welcome all the new members to the college at our diploma ceremony. And in my speech I said, view your qualification as the starting point of your professional development. So clearly that's a very different message to where we are with CET, which is here's your maintaining minimum standards of competence. And it's great to see people taking higher qualifications where they can contribute to the CET point requirements because they're getting those points they need, but it's developing them as they go. So I think CPD for sure is the way forward. We do need to do more as practitioners, both as dispensing opticians, as CLOs and as optometrists, to work more actively in this system of eye care that we are becoming more embedded in. So we have to develop and we have to work towards that. It's really crucial.
I think just in terms of kind of wrapping things up, because I'm conscious of time, in some ways it links nicely to the way I'd like to just summarise some of the things we've talked about. We've talked there about making information more accessible, and I think hopefully with events like the Alconversation, we're playing our part in making things more accessible. I understand from Jonathan there's a significant online audience viewing this event today, which is fantastic. So I'd just like to finish by saying, certainly, first of all, thank you to Alcon for hosting the event. As ever, it's been a real privilege to be involved. Thank you to the panel. But also just to perhaps, speaking to those of you in the room and also the audience at home to say, as professional people, it's incumbent on us all to be aware and appraised of changes in our profession. And I'm going to finish where I started, which there's a lot going on. And I think, for us, as the industry, we've got to get stuff out there. But my plea to all registrants is please, take every opportunity to absorb information so that you can be as informed as you can be about changes that affect your professional life. And if there's one thing I hope the last 90 minutes for the people who are in the room and online, they feel like they've learned something about some aspect that's important to them, and being better informed on that subject will help them engage in the debate going forward. And so thank you very much to the panel, thanks to the audience, and thanks to Alcon for hosting the event. Thank you.